Zelda's Advice, Chapter 27 of Shardik by Richard Adams. Keldrek looked about him at the shadowy, cavernous hall, as grim and barbaric a temple of blood as had ever housed the trophies of a tyranny. Because of the dimness of the light from above, torches, fixed in iron brackets, burned continually, and these had discolored the brickwork and the stone columns with irregular, cone-shaped streaks of black. In the still air the thick yellow flames lolled hither and yon, sluggish as lob-worms disturbed in winter-dug earth. Now and then a spurt of resin flared sideways, or a knot exploded with a crack. The smoke, eddying in the roof, and mingling its pine scent with the smell of the bear, seemed like the rustling sound of the straw made visible. Between the torch brackets, panoplies were fixed to the walls, short swords and ear-flapped helmets of Belishba, the round leather shields of Dealgai mercenaries, and the spike-and-ball spears which Santilcair Ketlis had first brought north from Yelda. Here, too, was the ripped and bloody banner of the Chalice of Perioth, which Gedlidan himself had taken 2 years before at the Battle of Sarkid, cutting his way through the enemy's hurdle palisades at the head of 12 followers, not one of whom had remained unwounded at the fight's end. The Canathron of Lopan, with its serpent's head and condor's wings arching to stoop, stood wreathed with vine shoots and red blossom, for it had been brought to Bekla as an enforced, though dubious, surety for the loyalty of Lopan, by hostage priests, who were permitted to continue its rites in attenuated form. Along the further wall, domed and yellow in the torchlight, were ranged the skulls of enemies of Shardik. Little they differed from one another, save in the patterns formed by the grinning teeth, though 2 or 3 were cracked like old plaster, and one was faceless, mere splinters surrounding a jagged hole from forehead to jawbone. The shadows of their eye sockets moved in the torchlight, but Keldrek had long ceased to pay any attention to these unburied remains. To him, indeed, the display was tedious, nothing more than a sop to the vanity of subordinate commanders in the field, one or another of whom would from time to time claim that he had killed enemies of rank, and hence deserved the distinction of presenting the skulls to Shardik. The girls kept them in trim, oiling and wiring, as they had once busied themselves with their hoes on the ledges of Kiso. Yet, for all the accumulated mementos of this victory and that, thought Keldrek, pacing slowly down the hall and turning at the sound of a sudden plunging movement behind the bars, the place was still what it had always been, disordered, impermanent, a repository rather than a shrine, perhaps because the life of the city itself had become that of a base behind an army, a society with few young men and too many lonely women. Had not Shardik been better served among the scarlet flowers of the Trepsis beside the pool, and in the dry, twilit forest, whence he himself had first stepped forward to offer him his life? When a fish is caught and lies in the net, he thought, one sees the lustre dying slowly out of its scales. And yet, how else to eat the fish? He turned once more, this time at the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor. The gong of the clock near the Peacock Gate had not long struck the 10th hour, and he had not expected Gedlidan's arrival so soon. Zilphi, older now, but still trim, quick, and light-stepping, came into the hall, raising her palm to her forehead with the smile of a friend. Of all the girls who had come to Kiso or had since entered the service of Shardik, Zilphi alone possessed both grace and a light heart, and Keldrek's sombre mood softened as he returned her smile. "Has Lord Gedlidan come so soon?" "No, my lord," replied the girl. "It is General Zelda who wishes to see you. He says that he hopes the time is convenient, for he needs to speak with you soon. He did not say so, my lord, but I believe that he wants to see you before General Gedlidan arrives." "I will go out to him," said Keldrek. "Watch by Lord Shardik, you or another. He must not be left alone." "I will feed him, my lord. It is time." "Then put the food in the rock-pit. If he will go out there for a while, so much the better." Zelda was waiting on the sun terrace that ran along the south side of the hall, his dark red cloak drawn close against the chilly breeze. Keldrek joined him, and together they walked across the gardens and on into the fields lying between the Barb and the Leopard Hill. "You have been watching with Lord Shardik?" asked Zelda. "For several hours. He is disturbed and fretful." "You speak as though he were a sick child." "At these times we treat him as such. It may be nothing, but I would be happier if I were sure that he is not sick." "Perhaps... could it be—" Zelda paused, but then said only, "Much sickness is ended by the coming of summer. He will soon be better." They rounded the western shore of the Barb and began to cross the pasture slope beyond. Before them, about 3/4 of a mile away, lay that part of the city walls that ran uphill to encircle Crander's eastern spur. "Who's that fellow coming down towards us?" asked Zelda, pointing. Keldrek looked. "Some nobleman, a stranger. It must be one of the provincial delegates." "A southerner, by the look of him, too dandified for any northern or western province. Why is he walking here alone, I wonder?" "He's free to do so if he wishes, I suppose. Many who visit the city like to be able to say that they've walked entirely round the city walls." The stranger came on, bowed graciously, with a rather affected sweep of his fur cloak, and passed by. "Do you know him?" asked Zelda. "Elleroth, Ban of Sarkid, a man about whom I've found out a good deal." "Why? Isn't he safe?" "Possibly, possibly not. It's strange that he should have come himself as delegate. He was with their Ketlis in the slave wars. In fact, he's been a noted Heldro in his time. There's no particular reason why he should have changed his ideas, but all the same I was advised that it would be safer to leave him alone than to try to get rid of him. He has a lot of influence and standing with his own people, and as far as I can learn, he's never done us any actual harm." "But has he helped us?" "Lepan's been fought over so much that it's hard to say. If a local ruler takes care to keep in with both sides, who's to blame him? There's nothing known against him except his record before we came." "Well, we'll see what he has to offer us at the council." Still Zelda seemed hesitant to talk of whatever had led him to seek out Keldrek, and after a little Keldrek spoke again. "Since we're talking of the delegates, I ought to mention another to you, the man you recently appointed as governor of Kabin." "Mallow? What about him? By the way, that man is staring after us. I wonder why." "Strangers not uncommonly stare after me," replied Keldrek with a faint smile. "I've become accustomed to it." "That's it, no doubt. Well, what about Mallow? Smar Turin of the foothills recommended him. Says he's known him for years. He seems an excellent man." "I've learned that until a short time ago he was provincial governor in Dealgai." "In Dealgai? Why did he leave?" "Exactly. To take up his patrimony of a small estate in Kabin? I'm inclined to doubt it. Our present relations with Dealgai are strained and difficult. We don't know what they may be intending. I wonder whether we ought to risk this appointment of yours. We might be walking into a trap. A knife in the back from Kabin would be bad just at the moment." "I think you're right, Keldrek. I knew nothing of this. I'll speak to Mallow myself tomorrow. We can't afford any risk in Kabin. I'll tell him we've decided that after all we ought to have a man with special knowledge of the reservoir." He fell silent again. Keldrek veered a little downhill to the left, thinking that by thus seeming to commence their return he might loose the Baron's tongue. "What do you think of the war now?" asked Zelda suddenly. "Ask the kites and the crows, they're the ones that know," replied Keldrek, quoting a soldier's proverb. "Seriously, Keldrek, and entirely between ourselves." Keldrek shrugged his shoulders. "You mean its prospects? You know more of those than I." "You say Lord Shardik seems ill at ease?" persisted Zelda. "Not every mood or ailment of Lord Shardik is a portent of the war. If that were so, a child could read the omens." "Believe me, Keldrek, I don't question your insight as priest of Shardik. Nor you my generalship, I hope." "Why do you say that?" Zelda stopped and looked round at the open, rough pasture about them. Then he sat down on the ground. After a few moments' hesitation, Keldrek joined him. "To sit here may not become our dignity," said Zelda, "but I prefer to speak where none can overhear. And I warn you, Keldrek, that if need be, I shall deny that I ever spoke at all." Keldrek made no reply. "More than 5 years ago we took this city, and there's not a man who fought in that campaign but knows that we did so by the will of Shardik. But what's his will now? I wonder whether I'm the first to feel perplexed on that score. I dare say you're not. You know what my men were singing after we took Bekla? Now Lord Shardik's battle's won, we'll squeeze the girls and lie in the sun. They don't sing that any more. 4 years up and down the marches of the southern provinces have knocked all that out of them. 3/4 of a mile away on the Serpent Tower, the southeastern tower of the Baron's palace, Keldrek could see a soldier leaning over the balustrade. No doubt he had been ordered to watch for the approach of Gedladan, but it was plain from his attitude that he had seen nothing as yet. What was Shardik's will in restoring us to Bekla? Was it what the men supposed, to make us strong and prosperous for the rest of our lives? If so, why is Ketlis still in the field against us? What have we done to displease Lord Shardik? Nothing that I know. Shardik killed Gel-Eflin. He struck the blow himself, and after we had taken Bekla, you and I and everyone supposed that by his will we should soon defeat Ketlis and capture Ikat. Then there would be peace, but that hasn't happened. It will happen, Keldrek. If you were anyone other than the king of Bekla and the priest of Shardik, if you were a provincial governor or a subordinate commander promising me something, I should answer, then it had better happen quickly. I'll be plain. For several years my men have been fighting and dying. They're just preparing to do so for another summer, and in no very good frame of mind. The truth is that, leaving aside the will of Shardik and speaking purely as a general, I can see no military reason why we should ever win this war. Someone below seemed to be calling to the man on the tower. He had leaned over the parapet, looked down for a few moments, and then resumed his watch. It was Lord Shardik who gave us the victory over Gel-Eflin, went on Zelda. If it hadn't been for what he did, we could never have defeated a Beklan army, and a regular force like ours. No one ever said otherwise. Talcominion himself knew it before the battle. Yet we did win, and we took Bekla. Now we're doing well merely to contain Ketlis. We can't defeat him, certainly not conclusively. There are several reasons why. I suppose when you were a boy you wrestled, ran races, and so on. Can you remember times when you knew for certain that the other lad was better than you were? As a general, Ketlis is quite out of the ordinary, and most of his men were in the former Southern Army of Patrol. Many of them feel that they're fighting for their homes and families, and that makes them ready to put up with very hard conditions. They're not like us, invaders disappointed in hopes of quick profits. Our men have felt for a long time now that something's slipped through their net. Food of some sort or other is easy to come by down in the south. We can't deprive Ketlis's army of food, and they don't look for much more than that. But their very existence makes difficulties for us. As long as they remain undefeated, they're a focus for disaffection and trouble anywhere in the Empire, from Gilt to Lipan, old Heldril sympathizers, and so on. Ketlis has only got to maintain himself in the field, but we've got to do more than that. We've got to defeat him before we can restore to Beklan people the peace and prosperity of which we've deprived them. And the plain truth is, Keldrek, that I have no grounds, no military grounds, for thinking that we can do it. The man on the Serpent Tower suddenly began waving his arms and pointing southeastward. Then he cupped his hands, shouted something downwards, and disappeared from the balcony. Gedladan will be here in less than an hour, said Keldrek. Have you said any of this to him? No, but I've reason to suppose that he's any... No, but I've no reason to suppose that he's any happier with our military prospects than I am. What about the help we're expecting from the council delegates tomorrow? Whatever it is, it won't be enough. It never has been in the past. You must understand that at present we're holding on in Lipan as best we can. It's not we, but Ketlis that means to attack. Can he? As you know, he has recently received a force from Dealgai, led by a baron of whose actions their king pretends to be ignorant. There's a rumor that Ketlis now believes himself strong enough both to cover Ikat and to attack us as well, and that he's planning to march further north than ever before. On Bekla? That would depend on his success once he'd started, I dare say, but my own belief is that he may go wide of Bekla and try to show his power in the country northeast of it. Suppose, for example, that he simply told the Dealgai that he'd lead them north on their march home, doing all the damage he could on the way. Suppose they set themselves to destroy the Kabin Reservoir. Could you not stop them? I don't know, but what I'm proposing, Keldrek, and what I have never proposed at all, if you receive it ill, is one of two courses. The first is that we should negotiate a peace with Erkitlis at once. Our terms would be that we retain Bekla with the northern provinces and as much land to the south as we can get. That would mean ceding certainly Yelda, Belishba, and probably Lipan, with Sarkit, of course. But we should have peace. And the second? For the first time, Zelda turned and looked full at Keldrek, his dark eyes and beard framed in the red cloak collar. Gently he drew out his knife, held it suspended a moment between finger and thumb, and then let it fall, hilt upwards, to stick quivering in the ground. Wrinkling his nose and sniffing, as though at the smell of burning, he drew out the knife and returned it to his sheath. The illusion was not lost upon Keldrek. "I knew it from the beginning, yes, that very night, that in some way you were carrying the destiny of Ortelga. Even before you and Belcodrazet set out for Kiso, I was sure that you had been sent to bring us luck and power. Later, when the first rumors reached Ortelga, I believed in Shardik's return, because I had seen you withstand Belcodраzet's anger and realized that only the truth could have enabled you to do so. It was I who advised Takominian to risk his life by crossing the Dead Belt by night to seek you out, and I was the first Baron to join him the next morning when he came ashore behind Lord Shardik. At the Battle of the Foothills, before ever Takominian reached the field, I led the first attack on Gelathan's army. I have never doubted Lord Shardik, nor do I doubt him now." "What then?" "Loose Lord Shardik! Loose him, and await what may befall. Perhaps it is not his will that we should continue the war. He may have another, perhaps an altogether different purpose. We should be ready to trust him, even to admit that we may have mistaken his will. If we loose him, he may reveal some unknown thing. Are you sure, Keldrek, that we may not be, after all, denying his purpose by keeping him here in Bekla? I have come to believe that the purpose cannot be the continuation of the war, for if it were, we should by now be at least within sight of the end. Somewhere we have lost the thread of our destiny. Loose him, and pray that in this darkness where we are wandering, he will put it back into our hand." "Loose Lord Shardik?" said Keldrek. He could imagine nothing less favourable either to the continuance of his reign or to the divine secrets still to be discovered by himself. At all costs he must steer Zelda away from this rash, superstitious idea, the consequences of which were quite unpredictable. "Loose Lord Shardik?" "And then follow him, simply trusting in what will befall. For if indeed we have failed him, then, since it cannot be in courage or resolution in the field, it can be only in not trusting him enough." It was on the tip of Keldrek's tongue to reply that the Tukinda had once spoken in this way, and that Takominian had known how to deal with it. As he paused, pondering how best to begin the delicate task of dissuasion, they both saw in the distance a servant running toward them across the pasture. They stood up and awaited him. "Tomorrow night is the Spring Fire Festival," said Keldrek. "I had not forgotten. I will say nothing of this to anyone, and we will speak of it again after the festival. I need time to think." The servant reached them, raised his palm to his bent brow, and waited, trying to control his panting breath. "Speak," said Keldrek. "My lord, Lord Gedaldan, is almost here. He has been sighted on the road, and will reach the Blue Gate within this half-hour." In the city below, the gongs sounded once more for the hour, the further following immediately upon the nearer like an echo. Keldrek perceived that to retain the servant would to put an end to their talk for the time being. "Accompany us," he said, and then to Zelda, as the man took up his place behind them, "I and the priestess Shelda will go out to meet Gedladan on the road. Will you not come with us?"